It's the year 1519. Hernan Cortez has just landed in what is now Mexico. Within 2 years, the Aztec Empire will fall and an entire continent will come under Spanish rule. Meanwhile, future colonial powers like Britain would go on to claim India and carve up Africa centuries later. But 700 years before any of this, another colonial empire had already conquered lands from Persia to Spain. For the people living in these former colonies today, their conquest, erasure, and persecution aren't taught as colonialism. They're remembered as divine salvation. Across politics, academia, and schools, it's a blind spot and often politically incorrect to mention this empire. But this particular colonial power over 1,000 years erased entire cultures, languages, religions, persecuted millions, and carried out a slave trade that impacted over 20 million people, which not only predated the transatlantic slave trade, but outlasted it until only 40 odd years ago. In today's video, we're talking about the colonialists they never talk about, the Islamic Arabs. It's the year 628. Muhammad, who proclaimed himself the last messenger of God, is no longer just a religious leader. He's now the head of a powerful, united force in Arabia. And with that new power, he starts looking outward. This year, he sends letters to the rulers of the world's great empires, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, the Persian King Khosrow, and others, demanding they embrace Islam. The message was simple: accept Islam or else. It didn't stop at letters either. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad declared, "I have been commanded to fight the people until they say, there is no God but Allah." That line became the theological backbone for what came next. The idea that Islam wasn't just a private belief system, it was a divine mission, one that was meant to be spread, and more often than not, violently. And to make things even clearer, he's also reported to have said, "Two religions shall not coexist in the land of the Arabs." In other words, the Arabian Peninsula was to be Islam only. Everyone else, Jews, Christians, pagans, had to convert, leave, or face a sword. So when Muhammad died, this divine mission accelerated. His successors, known as the rightly guided caliphs, immediately began expanding the empire beyond Arabia. Once united under one faith, Arab armies swept outward with terrifying speed. In just a few years, they conquered Syria and Iraq, defeated the Byzantines at Yarmouk in 636 and the Persians at Al-Qadisiyah in 637. The Sassanid Empire, one of the region's oldest civilizations, was ripped apart. Cities that resisted were looted, burned, or crushed. The last Persian Shah, Yazdegerd III, fled eastward but was hunted down and killed. Zoroastrian fire temples were demolished or converted into mosques. Persia, once Rome's great rival, fell. Its culture slowly suffocated under Islamic rule. To the west, Egypt was next, the jewel of Byzantium. In 642, Alexandria, a city renowned for philosophers, Christianity, and centuries of Greco-Roman heritage, surrendered after a long siege. Some towns signed pacts to avoid destruction, but that hardly meant mercy. Egyptian Christians, the Copts, were stripped of power and forced into dhimmi status, paying the jizya tax simply to exist. Revolts were crushed, their language faded, their identity erased. Arab forces then set their sights on the Levant, today's Israel and Palestine, a Byzantine Christian stronghold, also home to ancient Jewish and Samaritan communities. Jerusalem, sacred to Jews, Christians, and today Muslims, fell in 638. Its inhabitants became dhimmis, forced into submission. In 711, Arab armies invaded Sindh, modern-day Pakistan. The city of Dabal met them with fierce resistance, so the Arabs massacred its garrison, enslaved survivors, and burned the city. Within 3 years, Sindh was under Islamic control, repeating the familiar pattern: surrender and submit, or resist and face annihilation. In North Africa, the conquest was equally ruthless. Arab armies marched through the Maghreb, meeting fierce resistance from Berber tribes. Legendary warriors like Queen Kahina fought bravely, but resistance meant death or enslavement. Tens of thousands of Berbers were captured and sold into slavery. Cities like Carthage and Tangier fell, Arabic replaced indigenous languages, and Islam replaced traditional beliefs. Also in 711, they crossed into Spain. Led by Tariq ibn Ziyad, Muslim forces toppled the Visigoth kingdom, swiftly claiming most of the Iberian Peninsula. Cities either surrendered or were overrun. Christians who remained were stripped of power, reduced to second-class dhimmi status, tolerated under harsh conditions. But the sword was just the beginning. What followed was slower, but even more permanent. The Arab Islamic conquests didn't just take land, they took identity. In the centuries that followed, entire regions were transformed so deeply that most people today have no idea what was lost. It was cultural erasure. Wherever the Arabs ruled, they imposed a new language, religion, and political order, everything built around Arab identity. Under Caliph Abd al-Malik, Arabic became the empire's official language, replacing Greek, Coptic, Persian, and Syriac, languages that had defined civilizations for over 1,000 years. Administration, coinage, and religious life were now exclusively Arabic. To survive, conquered people learned their ruler's tongue. In Egypt, the people spoke Coptic, a direct descendant of the pharaoh's language, while Greek was used for governance. After conquest, both quickly faded. By the 10th century, even Egyptian Christians used Arabic daily. By the 12th, Coptic was nearly extinct, surviving only in church rituals. In Syria and Iraq, it was the same story. Aramaic, the language once spoken by Jesus, gradually disappeared. Today, it remains only in isolated villages, linguistic fossils in an Arab sea. Across North Africa, indigenous Berber languages were stripped from public life. Arabic dominated education, religion, and law. Berber tribes were displaced into remote mountains by Arab settlers, especially during the 11th century migration of the Banu Hilal. Today, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya proudly call themselves Arab nations, despite never originally being Arab. But it wasn't just language, it was religion too. In theory, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians could keep their faith as dhimmis, but protection meant paying the humiliating jizya tax, sometimes collected with a symbolic slap on the neck. Non-Muslims were tolerated as long as they accepted second-class status. In Persia, Zoroastrian temples were shut down or desecrated. Worshippers were harassed, with many fleeing eastward to India. In Arabia itself, Muhammad's declaration, "Two religions shall not coexist in the land of the Arabs," was ruthlessly enforced. By the 8th century, no open churches or synagogues remained, and pre-Islamic Arabian culture was obliterated. Even without violence, conversion was coerced. Muslims gained full rights, avoided taxation, and joined the ruling class. Non-Muslims, choosing the path of least resistance, slowly converted, quietly extinguishing entire cultures. The conquerors had a phrase to justify all this: Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance. Everything before Islam was worthless and needed to be erased. This was cultural colonialism, centuries before the Europeans set sail. Now, I do want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this video, you. No, seriously, this channel is completely fan-funded. No corporate overlords or gambling disguised as mobile games. Just regular people supporting through Patreon and helping keep this content independent. And if you're enjoying this video and the broader channel so far, consider signing up as a patron. You get perks like early access, Discord roles, and direct access to me. Links in the description below. So, what happened to the people who lived in these lands before the Arab conquests? Well, beyond the dhimmis, even for those who did convert to Islam, life under this new empire wasn't exactly equal. Not all Muslims were treated the same. A clear hierarchy emerged. Arab Muslims at the top, the conquerors, the elite, and non-Arab converts, known as Mawali, below. These converts, whether Persian, Berber, African, or others, were essentially second-class citizens. They had to be adopted by Arab tribes to even be recognized as Muslims, and still, they weren't truly equal. Under the Umayyad Caliphate, this discrimination was official policy. Non-Arab Muslims were often forced to pay the same humiliating taxes reserved for non-believers. Arab elites openly expressed their superiority, calling Persia's Ajam, mute or barbaric, claiming wisdom and nobility were exclusively Arab traits. But non-Arabs didn't quietly accept this treatment. During the Abbasid era, Persian intellectuals launched the Shu'ubiyya movement, pushing back against Arab supremacy and reminding the empire that Persia had its own rich culture long before Islam arrived. In North Africa, Berbers converted to Islam, fought in Arab armies, and even helped conquer Spain. Yet, they still faced enslavement, exploitation, and humiliation. Eventually, their anger erupted into the Berber revolt, nearly driving the Arabs from the Maghreb. In Persia, resentment against Arab discrimination fueled support for the Abbasid revolution, toppling the Umayyads. Then came the Zenge rebellion, one of the largest slave revolts in Islamic history. Thousands of African slaves, forced into brutal labor in Iraqi plantations, rose up in 869. For 14 years, they battled one of the era's greatest empires. The Arab Islamic Empire was not a harmonious blend of cultures. It was a colonial system built on racial hierarchy, religious dominance, and cultural erasure, exactly like the empires that followed centuries later. But the Zenge rebellion was one chapter in a much darker story, one of slavery spanning continents and centuries. While the Atlantic slave trade is widely condemned, the Arab Islamic slave trade lasted longer, covered more ground, and was often even more brutal, yet is rarely discussed. For over 1300 years, Arab Muslim traders enslaved millions across Africa, Europe, and Asia, creating one of history's largest forced migrations along the trans-Saharan and Indian Ocean slave routes. Conservative estimates put the number of enslaved Africans alone close to 20 million people, not including Europeans taken in Barbary raids or Asians trafficked from India and beyond. Up to half of these slaves died on their journey to market. Unlike the Atlantic trade, which prioritized men for plantation labor, the Arab slave trade largely targeted women for sexual servitude. The ratio of women to men was roughly 3 to 1, with women often fetching twice the price. They were sold into harems and concubinage, stripped of autonomy. Male slaves frequently faced castration to become eunuchs, a procedure with a staggering 50% mortality rate. Generations of African men vanished from history, while concubines' children were absorbed into Arab households. Slaves labored in salt mines, pearl diving, plantations, and military service. Many worked to death. Europeans, Indians, and Central Asians were also enslaved, often becoming soldiers, concubines, or court servants. In fact, the word slave itself derives from the Slavic peoples commonly enslaved by Islamic empires. Despite this diversity, Black Africans faced the harshest labor and greatest stigma. Slavery persisted in the Arab world long after the caliphates. Saudi Arabia abolished it only in 1962, Oman in 1970, and Mauritania as late as 1981, criminalizing it only in 2007. This wasn't a footnote, it was a vast, brutal enterprise, predating and outlasting the Atlantic trade. Yet, it's barely talked. Today, the lasting effects of Arab Islamic colonialism are everywhere, yet remain strangely invisible. The regions conquered by Arab empires, once culturally diverse with rich histories and vibrant identities, now predominantly call themselves Arab. Ancient languages like Coptic, Aramaic, and Berber have been nearly erased, existing only in fragments. Religious communities, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, survive in mere shadows, marginalized or exiled from the lands they once called home. Yet, we rarely discuss this history. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. It wasn't European, it wasn't white, and it wasn't Christian. But if colonialism is the domination, exploitation, and erasure of others, then the Arab Islamic empires were colonial to their core. And it is time we said so. Hey, you made it to the end. As always, don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and give the video a thumbs up. It really helps. A massive thank you to all my channel members and Patreon supporters. You're the reason I can keep making content like this. If you want to support the channel, consider joining the crew. Just hit the join button below or head over to Patreon. Even a small pledge goes a long way, and I would genuinely love to have you on board. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.